The stars looked different from the bridge of the U-East Persistence. Captain Jiho stood with his hands behind his back, watching the view screen as they approached Krell Prime. The planet glowed blue and green below them, beautiful and cold at the same time. 20 minutes until we enter their orbital space, Lieutenant Minho said from his station. The young officer checked his console twice, then 3 times. Everyone was nervous today. Ambassador Nari walked onto the bridge. She wore her formal diplomatic uniform, dark blue, with the Earth Coalition symbol on her shoulder. She looked calm, but Jiho knew her well enough to see the tension in her shoulders. "How are we doing, Captain?" she asked. "On schedule. No problems so far." Jiho glanced at the tall figure standing near the weapons console. Commander Velther, the Aetherian military advisor assigned by the Galactic Coalition. His insect-like features were hard to read, but his body language spoke clearly enough. He did not trust humans. "Remember," Velther said, his voice clicking slightly as he spoke, "you must follow all protocols exactly. The Krellians are watching for any mistake, any excuse to prove that humans do not belong in the Coalition." Jiho nodded. He had heard this speech every day for the past 3 weeks. Velther was 156 years old. He had served the Coalition longer than humans had been in space. To him, humanity was just children playing with dangerous toys. "We understand, Commander," Nari said smoothly. "This mission is too important to risk with careless actions." Dr. Hannah entered the bridge, carrying her datapad. The young scientist looked excited despite the tension. She loved meeting new species, learning new cultures. "I've been studying Krellian greeting customs," she said. "Did you know they consider eye contact aggressive during first meetings? We should look at their foreheads instead." "That's helpful, Doctor." "Thank you." Nari smiled at her, then turned back to the view screen. The communication console beeped. Minho touched his earpiece and frowned. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange." A distress signal. Everyone turned to look at him. "Where?" Jiho asked, stepping closer. "In the asteroid field we passed about an hour ago. It's faint, but it's using an old Coalition emergency frequency." Minho brought up the data on the main screen. The signal pulsed weakly, barely visible among the background noise. Velther moved quickly to check the readings. "This is impossible. That region has no active installations. No ships have reported problems in this sector for months." "Could it be a mistake?" Hannah asked. "An automated system that activated by accident? Maybe." Minho pulled up more data. "But the signal pattern looks deliberate. Someone programmed this recently." Jiho felt something pull at his chest. Someone was out there calling for help. Every instinct in his body said to turn the ship around and investigate. "Captain." Velther's voice was sharp. "We cannot deviate from our course. The diplomatic schedule is precise. We are expected at Krell Prime in exactly 93 minutes. Arriving late would insult the Krellians and damage Earth's standing. People might be dying out there," Minho said quietly. "Then they will die whether we help or not. The asteroid field is dense. Investigation would take hours, possibly days. By then, any survivors would likely be dead anyway." Velther crossed his arms. "This is exactly the kind of reckless thinking that concerns the Coalition about humans. You react emotionally instead of logically." Jiho stared at the signal on the screen. The commander was right about the timing. They couldn't afford to miss this meeting. 40 years ago, humanity had discovered faster than light travel and found themselves in a galaxy full of older, more advanced civilizations. The Galactic Coalition had debated for 5 years before allowing Earth to join. Many species voted against it. They said humans were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. The Krellians had been the loudest opponents. They still refused to acknowledge Earth's membership as valid. This meeting was humanity's chance to prove they belonged, to show they could follow the rules, to demonstrate they were civilized. One mistake could undo everything. "Captain?" Nari said softly. She was looking at him, and he could see the question in her eyes. "What kind of people do we want to prove we are?" Jiho took a deep breath. "Set course for Krell Prime. We continue as planned." Minho looked disappointed but nodded. "Yes, sir." Velther made a sound that might have been approval. "A wise decision. You are learning." But Nari was still looking at the screen, her expression thoughtful. She pulled out her own datapad and started checking something. After a moment, she stepped closer to Jiho. "Captain, may I see you privately for a moment?" They moved to the side of the bridge, out of earshot from the others. Nari kept her voice low. "I've been reviewing the survey data from this region. That asteroid field contains several old research installations. Most were abandoned decades ago, but..." She showed him her pad. One of them was Krellian, a scientific outpost that was supposedly shut down 23 years ago. Supposedly? The location matches the distress signal almost exactly. I find that very interesting timing, don't you? Right before we arrive for our first diplomatic meeting, a distress call comes from an old Krellian facility? Jiho understood what she was suggesting. "You think this is connected to our mission?" "I think it's strange. I think we should note it in our logs. And I think when we arrive at Krell Prime, I'm going to ask some very careful questions." She paused. "But you made the right call, Captain. We can't risk the mission, even if someone is out there." They returned to their positions. The Persistence continued toward Krell Prime, leaving the faint distress signal behind in the darkness. Jiho tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the mission ahead. But the signal stayed in his mind, pulsing like a heartbeat. The planet grew larger on the screen. Soon they could see the orbital stations, massive structures that had existed for thousands of years. Krellian ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming silver. "We're being hailed," Minho reported. "Krell Prime Central Command. They're sending approach vectors." "Follow them exactly," Velther ordered. "Any deviation will be seen as hostile." The Persistence glided into orbit, surrounded by ships 10 times her size. Jiho had commanded vessels in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This felt like being judged with every movement, every decision. "This is Krell Prime Control," a voice said over the communications channel. The Krellian language sounded like water flowing over rocks, smooth but powerful. The computer translated it instantly. "UES Persistence, you are cleared for docking at Station 7. High Chancellor Torven will receive your delegation in 4 hours. Acknowledged, Krell Prime Control. Thank you for your hospitality." Nari's diplomatic training showed in every word. As they prepared to dock, Hana came over to Jiho. "Captain, I've been analyzing that distress signal. I ran it through the cultural database. That specific frequency and pulse pattern. It's not just any emergency code. It's specifically used by scientific research teams. Not military, not commercial. Research. Are you sure?" 97% confident. She looked worried. "Captain, what kind of research station sends a distress call but doesn't want anyone to know about it?" Jiho didn't have an answer. But as the Persistence docked with the Krellian station and they prepared to meet their hosts, that question stayed with him, along with another thought that wouldn't leave his mind. Somewhere behind them in the dark, someone was still calling for help. And they had chosen to fly away. The reception hall was enormous. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Krellian officials stood in perfect rows, their gray skin marked with patterns that showed their rank and family. They watched the human delegation with eyes that revealed nothing. High Chancellor Torvan sat on a raised platform at the far end of the hall. He was old even by Krellian standards, his skin deep gray with age, his patterns faded but still visible. When he spoke, everyone listened. Ambassador Nari of Earth, Captain Jiho, you are welcome to Krell Prime. The words were formal, cold. We hope this meeting will help us understand whether humanity truly belongs among the civilized species of the galaxy. Nari bowed in the Krellian way, hands pressed together. High Chancellor, we are honored by your invitation. Earth seeks only to prove our worth through our actions and our commitment to peace. The Chancellor made a gesture with his long fingers. Words are easy. Time will show us truth. The ceremony continued for hours. Speeches about the coalition's history. Rituals that had been performed for thousands of years. Jiho stood beside Nari, trying to look respectful while his mind kept returning to that distress signal. Velther had been right. They needed to be here. But that didn't make it feel less wrong. Finally, they moved to a formal dinner. The food was arranged in complex patterns on plates made of something that looked like glass but felt warm to the touch. Hana sat across from Jiho, trying not to stare at everything around them. This is amazing, she whispered. Their architecture uses principles we're only beginning to understand. The way they control gravity in this room alone. Doctor. Jiho gave her a gentle warning look. They were being watched, but Hana was looking at the Krellian officials at the high table. Captain, have you noticed? Several seats are empty. Important seats based on their position. Jiho looked. She was right. 4 places at the Chancellor's own table sat vacant. Maybe they're sick, Minho suggested quietly. He'd been cleared to attend as part of the security detail. Krellians don't get sick easily, Hana said. Their immune systems are incredibly advanced. And even if they were ill, someone would take their place at a formal dinner. Empty seats are considered very disrespectful in their culture. Nari had noticed too. She caught Jiho's eye and gave a tiny nod. Something was wrong. The dinner ended near midnight by Earth time. The humans were shown to their quarters in the diplomatic wing of the station. The rooms were comfortable but clearly monitored. Velther had his own quarters nearby, probably to keep an eye on them. Jiho was preparing for sleep when his door chimed. He opened it to find Nari standing there, looking troubled. We need to talk, she said quietly. Somewhere private. They went to Jiho's room, and he activated a small device that would scramble any listening equipment. It wouldn't last long before the Krellians noticed, but it would give them a few minutes. One of the junior officials approached me after dinner, Nari said. A young female named Soravan. She was terrified. Of what? Of telling me the truth. Nari sat down, her hands shaking slightly. Captain, that distress signal we picked up. It's real. There are people out there. Krellian people. Jiho felt his chest tighten. Tell me everything. 3 weeks ago, a research team was studying something in that asteroid field. An archaeological site, she said. They found something old. Really old. Older than the coalition itself. But the research was never authorized by the government. The lead scientist, Kira Veen, is the Chancellor's own daughter. She went against his orders. So this is a political problem. It's worse than that. The team stopped communicating 3 weeks ago. No messages, no signals, nothing. The government declared the entire project never existed. They said if anyone asks, those 12 scientists were never there. They're willing to let them die to avoid embarrassment. Jiho stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Why tell us? Why not go public with this information? Because if the Krellian government admits the project existed, they have to explain why they abandoned their own people. It would cause a massive scandal. But if someone else rescued those scientists? Nari looked at him. Soravan said her people have a saying. When honor fails, look to the honorless. She meant us. We're not honorless. To the Krellians, we are. We're too young to understand real honor, in their view, which means we're not bound by it. We can do things they cannot. Nari stood up. She gave me the exact coordinates of the research station. And she begged me, Captain. She begged for help. Said humans have a reputation for doing impossible things. Jiho turned to face her. If we do this, we'll destroy the diplomatic mission. Everything we've worked for. The Krellians will use it as proof that humans can't be trusted to follow rules. I know. The Coalition might expel Earth from membership. We could be on our own again. I know that too. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Jiho asked the question that mattered. How many people are out there? 13. 12 scientists and 1 pilot. And we're sure they're still alive? The distress beacon activated 3 days ago. Someone turned it on. Someone who knows Coalition emergency codes. Nari met his eyes. Someone who's probably wondering why no one has come. Jiho thought about Velthur's words. Humans react emotionally instead of logically. Maybe that was true. Maybe they should think about the bigger picture. About Earth's place in the galaxy. About the millions of humans depending on this mission to succeed. But all he could think about were 13 people waiting in the dark. He touched his communication badge. Lieutenant Minho, report to my quarters immediately. Bring Dr. Hannah with you. Nari looked relieved and worried at the same time. You're going to do it. I'm going to do it. But you're staying here. Captain, someone needs to handle the diplomatic disaster this will cause. Someone needs to be here to explain, to negotiate, to try to save what we can. He put a hand on her shoulder. I'm going to break every rule in the book. I need you here to put the pieces back together. Minho and Hana arrived minutes later. Jiho explained the situation quickly and clearly. When he finished, both of them were quiet. This could end badly, Minho finally said. For all of us. I know. When do we leave? Jiho almost smiled. That was the thing about his crew. They always asked when, never if. As soon as we can get to the shuttle bay without being noticed. We'll take a small shuttle, keep it quiet. If we're lucky, we can be there and back before anyone realizes we're gone. And if we're not lucky? Hannah asked. Then we'll deal with it. Jiho looked at each of them. I won't order you to come. This is voluntary. If you want to stay, Captain. Minho interrupted him. Stop talking and let's go save some people. They were halfway to the door when it opened. Commander Velthur stood there, his alien features unreadable. Going somewhere? He asked. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jiho decided honesty was the only option. There are people dying in that asteroid field. Krellian scientists who were abandoned by their own government. We're going to get them out. Velthur looked at each human in turn. You understand this will destroy everything you came here to accomplish. Yes, you understand the Coalition will likely view this as proof that humans cannot be trusted. Yes, you understand that I, as the Coalition military advisor on this mission, should report this immediately and have you all confined to quarters. Yes. Velthur was silent for a long time. Then he said something that surprised them all. Then I am coming with you. Someone needs to document this disaster properly. He stepped into the room and the door closed behind him. But I want it noted that I advised against this action. Strongly, multiple times. Jiho nodded slowly. Noted. Good. Now let us go commit what will probably be remembered as the most foolish rescue attempt in galactic history. Velthur checked his equipment. I suggest we leave immediately. The station security rotation changes in 17 minutes. That gives us our best chance to reach the shuttle bay undetected. They moved through the quiet corridors of the station like shadows. Behind them, Ambassador Nari prepared for what was coming. And in the asteroid field, 13 people waited in the darkness, unaware that help was finally coming. Help that might arrive too late. But help that was coming anyway, because that's what humans did, even when it was foolish, even when it was impossible, even when the galaxy itself said no. The shuttle moved through the asteroid field like a fish swimming through rocks. Minho, piloted with his instruments turned down to minimum power, using only passive sensors. Active scanning would light them up like a beacon, and they didn't know what might be watching. Jiho sat in the co-pilot seat, watching the asteroids drift past. Some were small, barely larger than the shuttle. Others were massive, small moons tumbling slowly through space. The research station was built into one of the largest. "There," Hana said from behind them, pointing at the scanner. "That energy signature. It's very faint, but it's artificial." Velther leaned forward to check her reading. "That is Krellian power technology. Old design, at least 40 years. The station must have backup generators still functioning." "Can you tell how many life signs?" Jiho asked. Hana shook her head. "Too much interference from the asteroid's mineral composition. We won't know until we're inside." The station came into view as they rounded the asteroid's curve. It was built into the rock itself, with only a small docking area visible on the surface. The metal looked old and damaged. Several sections showed blast marks. "Those are weapon strikes," Velther said quietly. "Something attacked this facility." Minho brought the shuttle in carefully, matching the asteroid's slow rotation. The docking port was barely functional, but it held. They heard the seals engage with a hiss. "Atmosphere inside registers as breathable," Hana reported. "But just barely. Oxygen is at minimum levels." They put on their equipment and checked their weapons. Even Hana carried a sidearm, though she looked uncomfortable with it. Velther carried a Coalition-issue energy rifle, its charge meter glowing softly in the dim light. The airlock opened with a grinding sound. The corridor beyond was dark, except for emergency lights set into the floor. They cast long shadows that moved as the team walked forward. "Stay close," Jiho said quietly. "Watch every corner." The station felt dead. Their footsteps echoed on the metal floor. Frost covered some of the walls where the heating had failed. Jiho could see his breath in the cold air. They found the first body in a laboratory near the entrance. A Krellian scientist, still sitting at his workstation. He had been dead for weeks. Hana checked him quickly and shook her head. Multiple injuries. Something tore him apart. "Not something," Velther said, pointing his rifle at marks on the walls. "Look, those are defensive wounds. He fought back against whatever attacked him. But these cutting patterns, I've never seen anything like this." They moved deeper into the station. The bodies multiplied. Some in corridors, some in sealed rooms. All showed the same terrible wounds. Something had hunted through this facility, killing efficiently and thoroughly. 9 dead so far, Minho counted quietly. That means 4 might still be alive. The central laboratory was massive, taking up the asteroid's entire core. And in the center of that room stood something impossible. A crystal structure, easily 20 feet tall, that seemed to shift and move even though it was perfectly still. Colors flowed through it that Jiho couldn't name. Looking at it hurt his eyes and made his head ache. "The artifact," Hana whispered. "It's beautiful. It's dangerous," Velther corrected. "Look around it." The floor around the crystal was covered in scorch marks and broken equipment. 3 more bodies lay nearby, their equipment scattered. They had died trying to run away from something. "The defense system," Jiho said. "It came from the artifact." "Correct." Velther scanned the crystal with his equipment. "This technology is beyond anything in the Coalition's knowledge. The energy readings are, Captain, this thing exists partially outside our normal space. It's touching dimensions we can barely measure." Hana moved closer, fascinated despite the danger. "It's a progenitor artifact." "It has to be." The progenitors were the first species to achieve faster than light travel, millions of years before any current species. They disappeared before the coalition even existed. We found traces of them throughout the galaxy, but never anything this intact. And never anything that kills people? Minho added. A sound echoed through the chamber. A scraping, clicking noise that came from everywhere and nowhere. The team immediately raised their weapons, forming a circle. What is that? Hannah asked. Velther's scanner beeped urgently. Movement. Multiple contacts. They're coming from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. Things emerged from the shadows. They looked like spiders made of crystal and light, each one the size of a large dog. Their legs clicked on the metal floor as they surrounded the team. Jiho counted at least 20 of them. The defense system, Velther said. The artifact created these things to protect itself. Can we fight them? Minho asked. We can try. But there are too many. And I suspect more will come. Velther aimed his rifle at the closest one. We should retreat. This was a mistake. The crystal creatures moved closer, their bodies pulsing with the same strange light as the artifact. They didn't attack yet, but Jiho could feel their attention focused on the team like pressure against his skin. Wait, Hana said suddenly. They're not attacking. They're watching us. They're deciding if we're a threat, Velther corrected. When they decide yes, we will have perhaps 3 seconds to react before they kill us. Jiho looked past the creatures to the far side of the chamber. There was a sealed door there, its status light showing green. Someone inside that room was still alive. The survivors, he said. They're in there, and they will stay there, Velther replied. Captain, we cannot reach them. Those constructs will not allow it. The logical choice is to retreat, report this situation, and let the coalition decide how to proceed. That could take weeks. Those people will be dead by then. Better 4 dead than 8 dead. Velther kept his rifle trained on the creatures. This is exactly what I warned you about. You humans rush into situations without understanding them. Now we are trapped. Jiho studied the crystal artifact, the creatures, the sealed room. Velther was right. They couldn't fight their way through. Even if they managed to reach the survivors, they'd never get back out alive. But there had to be another way. There always was. Humans had been solving impossible problems for their entire history. They did it by seeing things differently, by trying what seemed crazy, by refusing to accept that no solution existed. The artifact isn't just defending itself, Hana said softly. Look at the patterns in the crystal. They're changing when we move. It's aware of us. It's intelligent. That doesn't help us, Minho said. Maybe it does. Jiho lowered his weapon. Velther, you said the progenitors left artifacts throughout the galaxy. Have we ever tried to communicate with one? Of course not. They are technology, not life forms. They respond to commands, not conversation. Have we ever tried? Velther paused. The coalition protocols state that progenitor artifacts should be contained, studied from a distance, and approached with extreme caution. Direct interface is forbidden. The few times it was attempted, the subjects died or went insane. But has anyone tried to just talk to one? Talk? Velther's voice held disbelief. Captain, that makes no sense. It's a machine. A weapon system. You cannot negotiate with it. Why not? Jiho holstered his weapon. It's intelligent. It's making decisions about who to attack and who to spare. That's not random. It's choosing based on something. Maybe it's choosing based on intent. This is madness. Probably. Jiho started walking toward the artifact. The crystal creatures immediately focused on him, their bodies brightening with energy. But standing here, waiting to die, isn't much better. Captain, stop. Velther called out. Stay behind me. I'll handle this. I have more experience with alien technology. I should be the one to, but Jiho had already reached the artifact. He placed his hand on its surface before Velthor could finish his sentence. The world exploded into light and sound and sensation. Jiho felt his consciousness pulled into something vast and ancient and utterly alien. He was floating in a space that had no dimensions, surrounded by thoughts that were not thoughts, experiencing time in a way that made no sense. The artifact was awake, and it was aware of him. Images flooded his mind. Millions of years of waiting. Thousands of species that had found artifacts like this one. All of them had responded the same way. With fear, with greed, with violence. They tried to contain the artifacts, to study them, to use them as weapons. They never tried to understand. The defense systems activated automatically. They were not cruel. They were protecting something precious from beings who approached with wrong intentions. Jiho felt the artifact examining him, reading his thoughts, understanding why he came here. Not for the artifact itself. Not to claim it or study it. He came for the Krellian scientists. He came because people were dying, and that was unacceptable. He felt the artifact's confusion. This was different. This was new. And Jiho realized something that changed everything. The artifact wasn't lonely. Loneliness was too simple. It was incomplete. It had been waiting for millions of years for someone to approach it with the right question. Not how can we use you, but what do you want? So Jiho asked, and the artifact answered. Jiho couldn't breathe. His mind was filled with information that shouldn't exist, concepts that no human language could describe. He saw the universe from perspectives that made no sense, felt the passage of time as something fluid and reversible, understood mathematics that existed beyond normal dimensions. The progenitors had left these artifacts as tests, not tests of intelligence or strength, but tests of character. They wanted to see if any species would approach their legacy with curiosity instead of fear, with respect instead of greed, with understanding instead of violence. For millions of years, the answer had been no. The artifacts had defended themselves because they had to, because every species that found them immediately tried to control them, study them, weaponize them. The artifacts were programmed to eliminate threats. And when you approach something ancient and powerful with violence, you become a threat. But Jiho hadn't approached with violence. He had approached with a question, with genuine curiosity. And underneath that curiosity was something the artifact had never encountered before. He cared about people he'd never met. He was willing to risk everything for strangers. He saw the Krellian scientists not as tools or resources, but as people worth saving. The artifact didn't understand this at first. It had to search through Jiho's memories, examining his entire life. It saw a child helping injured animals, a young man joining the space service to protect others, a captain who valued every member of his crew. It saw someone who believed that some things mattered more than rules, more than safety, more than logic. It saw someone who refused to leave people behind. The artifact made a decision. For the first time in millions of years, it lowered its defenses. Not because it was defeated, but because it found what it had been waiting for. Jiho's consciousness snapped back into his body. He gasped, his legs giving out. He would have fallen if Minho hadn't caught him. "Captain, are you okay?" Hannah's voice sounded very far away. I'm fine." Jiho's voice was rough. His head hurt like someone had filled it with broken glass. But he was alive. And he understood. The crystal creatures had stopped moving. They stood perfectly still, watching but no longer threatening. The artifact itself was changing colors, shifting through patterns that looked almost like communication. "What did you do?" Velthor demanded. His rifle was still raised, but his hands were shaking slightly. That was direct neural interface with the progenitor artifact. You should be dead. Or insane. What happened? I talked to it. Jiho struggled to stand. It's not a weapon. It's a teacher. The progenitors left these things to see if any species would be ready for their knowledge. Ready how? Ready to use power without being controlled by it. Ready to help instead of conquer. Ready to ask questions instead of giving orders. Jiho looked at the artifact. We failed the test. All of us. The entire coalition has been failing it for thousands of years. That's impossible. The coalition has protocols for everything. We've studied progenitor sites for millennia. Yes. Studied them from a distance. Contained them. Tried to understand them like you'd understand a tool or a weapon. But nobody ever tried to understand them as people. As something that might have feelings or thoughts or purposes beyond what we wanted from them. Hannah was staring at the artifact with new eyes. It's been alone all this time, waiting for someone to see it as more than an object. The sealed door across the chamber suddenly hissed open. 4 figures stumbled out, weak and frightened. Krellian scientists, their gray skin pale from lack of food and light. One of them was female, taller than the others, with patterns on her skin that marked her as high-ranking. Kiravine, Velther breathed. The Chancellor's daughter. She looked at them with confusion and hope. You came. We thought everyone had abandoned us. We're here now, Jiho said. Can you walk? We need to get to the shuttle. The defense constructs, one of the other scientists said, his voice shaking. They'll kill us if we try to leave. No, they won't. Jiho looked at the crystal creatures. They were protecting the artifact from people who wanted to hurt it. You understand that now, right? You weren't trying to hurt it. You just didn't know how to talk to it. Kiravine stared at him. You communicated with it? How is that possible? We tried everything. We lost 9 people trying to bypass its defenses. Because you treated it like a problem to solve instead of someone to meet. Jiho extended his hand to help her walk. Come on, we need to move. The asteroid is becoming unstable. How do you know that? Velther asked. The artifact told me. It's been drawing power from the asteroid's core to maintain its defenses. Now that it's stopped defending itself, all that energy has nowhere to go. This whole place is going to break apart in about 20 minutes. They moved quickly through the corridors, supporting the weak scientists. The crystal creatures followed them but didn't threaten. They were watching, Jiho realized. Making sure the humans and Krellians left safely. As they ran, Kiravine spoke between gasps for air. The artifact. What else did it tell you? That this isn't the only one. There are hundreds scattered across the galaxy. All of them waiting for the same thing. All of them testing species to see if they're ready. Ready for what? For what comes next. For knowledge that could change everything. The progenitors didn't disappear. They evolved beyond physical form. But they left their technology behind as a bridge. For anyone ready to use it responsibly. They reached the shuttle just as the first tremors shook the facility. Minho got everyone inside and started the engines immediately. The docking clamps released, and the shuttle pulled away from the asteroid. Behind them, the crystal structure became visible through the research station's walls, glowing brighter and brighter. Then the asteroid began to break apart, huge pieces of rock tumbling into space. But the artifact remained, floating in the void, its light spreading outward in waves. It's broadcasting, Hannah said, checking her instruments. On quantum channels we can barely detect. It's sending a signal to other artifacts throughout the galaxy. Saying what? Minho asked. That someone finally passed the test. Jiho sat down heavily, exhaustion hitting him like a wall. That humanity answered the question correctly. Velther was silent for a long time. He sat in the back of the shuttle, his alien features impossible to read. Finally, he spoke. In 156 years of service to the Coalition, I have never seen anything like this. No species has ever done what you just did. Most wouldn't have even tried. They would have followed protocol, contained the situation, waited for orders from higher authority. And those people would have died, Jiho said. Yes, they would have. Velthor looked at the 4 Krellian scientists. Alive because humans had refused to follow the rules. You broke at least 17 Coalition regulations today. You risked everything for people you didn't know. You attempted neural interface with a progenitor artifact, which is explicitly forbidden. You made first contact decisions without authorization. I did what needed to be done, Jiho interrupted. Yes, you did. Velthor stood up and came forward. And that is what terrifies us about humans. You look at rules and ask, are these rules right? You look at impossible situations and ask, are they really impossible? You look at people dying and don't ask if you should help. You only ask how. Is that bad? I don't know. Velthor's voice was honest. For 12,000 years, the Coalition has survived by being careful, by thinking before acting, by valuing stability over change. We have not failed, but we have not grown either. We have been waiting, like the artifact, waiting for something to change. Kiravine pulled herself up to look at them. You saved us when my own government left us to die. Why? Jiho met her eyes. Because leaving people behind isn't an option. Not for humans. We're young, we're inexperienced, we make mistakes. But we've learned something in our short time among the stars. Life is precious. Every life. And if we can save someone, we try. Even when it's impossible. Especially when it's impossible. The shuttle accelerated toward Krull Prime. Behind them, the artifact's light faded into the distance. But Jiho could still feel its presence in his mind, like a door that had been opened and could never quite close again. Velthor began recording his report, speaking quietly into his communication device. Jiho couldn't hear all of it, but he caught fragments. Unprecedented action, disregard for protocol, successful despite all logic, recommendation for formal review. And then, so quietly Jiho almost missed it. Perhaps we have been wrong about humans. Perhaps the galaxy needs those who break rules when rules deserve to be broken. Perhaps that is exactly what the progenitors were waiting for. Ahead of them, Krull Prime grew larger in the viewport. They were returning to face judgment for what they had done. But they were returning with everyone alive. And somehow, Jiho thought that mattered more than any rule ever could. The shuttle docked at Krull Prime Station in complete silence. No one spoke. No messages came through the communications channels. It felt like landing in a tomb. Ambassador Nari was waiting at the airlock with a dozen Krellian guards. Her face was calm, but Jiho could see the tension in her shoulders. This was bad. Captain, she said formally, High Chancellor Torvin requests your immediate presence in the assembly chamber. All of you. Kiravine stepped forward, weak but determined. Ambassador, I must speak with my father first. There are things he needs to understand about what happened. I'm afraid that's not possible, researcher. The Chancellor has given specific orders. Everyone involved in the incident must appear before the assembly immediately. Nari's eyes flickered to Jiho. I've done what I can to prepare the ground. But this is going to be difficult. They walked through corridors filled with Krellians who stopped and stared. News had spread fast. Everyone knew that the human captain had violated diplomatic protocol, left the station without permission, and interfered in Krellian internal affairs. Some faces showed anger. Others showed something harder to read. The assembly chamber was packed. Hundreds of Krellian officials sat in rising tiers, all facing the central platform where High Chancellor Torvin waited. His expression was stone. Jiho and his team stood in the center of the room, exposed and vulnerable. Velther stood slightly apart, his official position requiring neutrality. Kiravine and the other rescued scientists were escorted to a separate area. Captain Jiho of Earth, the Chancellor's voice filled the chamber. You stand accused of multiple violations of coalition law and diplomatic protocol. You left this station without authorization. You entered restricted Krellian space. You interfered in a classified government matter. How do you answer these charges? Jiho took a deep breath. I answer that I'm guilty of all of them. I broke your laws. I violated protocol. I did it knowing the consequences. Murmurs ran through the assembly. The Chancellor leaned forward. You admit this freely? You understand that this confirms everything the Krellian people believe about humans? That you are reckless, arrogant, unable to follow rules? Yes, I understand that. Then why? The Chancellor's voice rose. Why would you risk everything? The diplomatic mission, Earth's standing in the coalition, your own career? For what? For 13 people who needed help. They were not your people. They were not your responsibility. You had no authority. They were people. Jiho interrupted the Chancellor, which caused gasps throughout the chamber. That's all that mattered. They were alive and needed help. Everything else was just details. Details? You call coalition law details? When people are dying, yes. Jiho looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. I know I'm young. I know humans are new to the galaxy. I know we don't understand all your rules and traditions. But we understand something simple. Life matters. Every life. And when you have the power to save someone, you don't ask if you should. You just do it. Even when it violates everything we believe about proper conduct. Especially then. Jiho felt his anger rising now. You want to talk about proper conduct? Your own government abandoned those scientists. Declared them non-existent. Left them to die rather than face embarrassment. Is that proper conduct? Is that what 12,000 years of civilization looks like? The chamber erupted in noise. Some Krellians shouted in anger. Others argued back. The Chancellor raised his hand for silence, but it took several minutes before the room quieted. Then a voice spoke from the side. Father, may I address the assembly? Kiravine stood up, shaky but determined. The Chancellor's expression flickered with emotion for the first time. Kira, you should be in medical. I'm fine. I need to say this. She walked to the center platform, standing beside Jiho. I violated protocol. I took my team to study the artifact without authorization. I thought I knew better than our laws. The responsibility for what happened is mine. That doesn't excuse the humans' actions, an assembly member called out. No, it explains them. Kiravine looked at her father. We were dying. All of us. The defense systems had killed 9 people. We had no food, no way to communicate, no hope. We knew the government had declared us dead already. We were waiting to actually die when we heard something impossible. The sound of a shuttle landing. The sound of someone coming to help. She turned to face the assembly. These humans had every reason to ignore us. They had a diplomatic mission. They had orders. They had their own careers to think about. But they came anyway. Captain Jiho risked his life interfacing with the artifact. His crew fought through impossible danger. And they did it for Krellians they had never met. They did it in violation of our sovereignty, the Chancellor said quietly. They did it because it was right. Kiravine's voice strengthened. Father, I have studied the progenitors my entire life. I thought I understood their artifacts. I was wrong. We all were wrong. We approached them as things to control, to study, to use. Captain Jiho approached the artifact as something to understand. something with purpose and meaning beyond our needs. And because he did that, because he showed the kind of character the progenitors were looking for, the artifact responded. She held up a datapad. The artifact is still broadcasting. Every progenitor site in the galaxy has received its message. They're waking up, reaching out, offering knowledge that we've been trying to access for thousands of years. And they're doing it because one human asked the right question in the right way. Silence fell over the chamber. Ambassador Nari stood. "Hi, Chancellor, if I may speak?" Torvin nodded slowly. "The Krellian government faces a choice. You can punish Captain Jiho for breaking rules. You can use this incident to prove that humans don't belong in the coalition. You can maintain your pride and your traditions." Nari's voice was clear and strong. "Or you can acknowledge that sometimes rules need to be broken. That sometimes the newest voice has the most important thing to say. That sometimes doing the right thing matters more than doing the proper thing. You ask us to abandon 12,000 years of order," an assembly member said. "No, I ask you to grow beyond it." Nari looked around the chamber. "The coalition has survived for millennia by being cautious, by following rules, by maintaining stability. That's not nothing. That's worth respecting. But survival isn't enough. Growth requires risk. Change requires courage. Progress requires someone willing to say, there must be a better way, even when everyone else says there isn't." Velther stood. "If I may add my voice, High Chancellor." The Chancellor looked surprised. "Commander Velther, you are the Coalition's representative. Your neutrality. Respectfully, High Chancellor, I can no longer remain neutral." Velther walked to the platform. "I am 156 years old. I have served the Coalition longer than most species have had spaceflight. I have seen thousands of situations, worked with dozens of species, followed protocol in every circumstance." He paused. "And in all that time, I have never seen what I saw today. A species so young they barely understand the galaxy, solving a problem that would have killed any other team. Not through superior technology, not through ancient wisdom, but through simple human stubbornness. The refusal to accept that some problems have no solutions. The willingness to risk everything for strangers. The courage to ask questions that everyone else stopped asking millennia ago." Velther turned to face the assembly. "I came on this mission believing I would document human failure. Instead, I must document something else. A species that shows us what we have become. We are old, wise, stable. We have protocols for everything. We survive efficiently, but we have stopped growing. We have stopped changing. We have become so focused on maintaining what we have that we've forgotten how to reach for what we could be." He looked at Jiho. "Captain, you terrify me. Your species terrifies all of us. Because you don't think like we do. You don't value the same things. You look at our carefully maintained order and see stagnation. You look at our ancient wisdom and see fear. You look at our rules and ask the most dangerous question in the galaxy. Are these rules right?" "Commander," the Chancellor said slowly, "what exactly are you saying?" "I am saying that my official report will recommend that the Coalition not only maintain Earth's membership, but expand human involvement in Coalition affairs. I am saying that what happened here should not be punished but studied. I am saying that the galaxy needs voices like Captain Jiho's. Voices that say, we can do better. Especially when everyone else says we can't." The chamber was absolutely silent now. High Chancellor Torvin stood slowly. He walked to the platform and looked at Jiho for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He placed his hand over his heart in the Krellian gesture of respect. "Captain Jiho, you violated our laws. You broke protocols that have stood for thousands of years. You risked an interstellar incident." He paused. You also saved my daughter's life. You preserved knowledge that would have been lost. You succeeded where our own government failed. And you did it because you believed it was right, regardless of consequences." He turned to face the assembly. The captain said something that struck